BBC World Service. It's 13 hours GMT. This is Oliver Conway with the newsroom. Soldiers in Myanmar are reported to be using rubber bullets against protesters in Mandalay, and there have been similar scenes elsewhere. But so far, the demonstrations have continued against the coup. We'll have the latest. Also on the newsroom, an Indian court has issued arrest warrants for 2 more climate activists over their support for protesting farmers. A huge study in Israel finds the Pfizer COVID vaccine works well in the real world as well as in trials.
Is it definitely good news? When you vaccinate and you have more than 90% protection, you can open the education system.
And later,
what we found were actually filter feeding animals that were attached to rocks. So these look like sponges to us, but we haven't actually got hold of any yet. We've only got video of them.
Life beneath the Antarctic ice. First, our top stories.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. Soldiers in Myanmar are reported to be firing rubber bullets at protesters in the central city of Mandalay. Social media posts are showing wounded demonstrators and the sound of gunshots. The military, which seized power in a coup more than 2 weeks ago, has been boosting its presence in cities across the country as it seeks to quell mass demonstrations. Jonathan Head is following events from Bangkok.
The military is now making itself very visible in Yangon and other cities in Myanmar. Soldiers have replaced the police at many strategic locations, and 8-wheeled armoured vehicles have been seen trying to navigate the rush hour traffic in Yangon, sometimes surrounded by cars honking their opposition to the coup. New laws have been decreed by the military government stipulating harsh punishments for anyone who obstructs or defames the army or who puts out information deemed inimical to public order.
A court in India has issued arrest warrants against 2 more activists as part of the ongoing investigation into an alleged international conspiracy to spread hostility towards India. The Delhi police are investigating Nikita Jacob and Shantanu in connection with a document shared on social media on how to help Indian farmers campaigning against new agrarian laws. China says it has cracked down on a series of fake vaccine scams with dozens of arrests, including a criminal group said to have made a profit of nearly $3 million. Stephen McDonnell reports.
Local police are said to have arrested at least 70 suspects in 21 separate cases of coronavirus vaccine fraud. According to a report in China's state-controlled media, one group masked saline solution and mineral water as vaccine doses. Fake vaccines have reportedly been produced and distributed by criminal groups, including as part of emergency inoculation programs at hospitals, and in some cases smuggled abroad.
South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, has again failed to appear before a corruption inquiry, despite the country's highest court ordering him to do so. Mr. Zuma has accused the commission of bias and demanded that its chairman recuse himself. Mr. Zuma was forced to resign over graft scandals in 2018. Here's Pomza Falani.
The Commission has been sitting since 2018 and has heard evidence from scores of witnesses, including high-ranking government officials. But Mr. Zuma has been by far the most reluctant and difficult witness, having to be forced to appear through a number of court summons. On Monday, his legal team issued a statement notifying the Commission that he would not be appearing this week or ever. Mr. Zuma has been implicated in shady dealings by at least 40 witnesses so far, but has denied any wrongdoing.
BBC News. The army in the Democratic Republic of Congo says suspected Islamists have killed 16 people and burned down a church in the northeastern province of Ituri. They attacked people as they were worshipping in the village of Ndalia. The Allied Democratic Forces, which originated in Uganda, is active in the region. The Islamic State group has said it carried out some ADF attacks, but no links between the two have been confirmed. Human Rights Watch has condemned the authorities in Singapore for jailing an activist for holding a small protest. Jolovan Wham was ordered to serve 3 weeks in prison for being part of an illegal gathering aboard a metro train in 2017. Rights groups have criticised Singapore's rules, which outlaw demonstrations of any size without a police permit. Scientists who bored a hole through an ice shelf in the Weddell Sea of Antarctica have discovered strange life forms living in total darkness. The findings were reported by researchers from the British Antarctic Survey. Ben Lowings reports.
The drilling exercise was designed to sample sediment, but the video camera lowered down the hole descended right to the sea floor, where by chance it hit a boulder. On it, the scientists could see bacteria and 2 types of sponge. There were also small animals with a stalk-like head. They say these could be a form of predator known as a hydroid. Researchers looking for marine life far beneath the ice have seen types of worms, fish and jellyfish, but they've not previously reported organisms stuck in place on the sea floor.
France's Consumer Affairs and Anti-Fraud Watchdog has fined Google $1.3 million for what it said was the misleading way it displayed hotel rankings. Google had been using its own system of giving tourist accommodation stars, which led to confusion with the official ratings awarded by France's Tourism Development Agency. BBC News.
Thanks very much. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. 2 weeks on from the coup in Myanmar, the military authorities have stepped up their campaign against protesters. 400 people have been arrested, many at night, and the internet has been cut off for hours at a time. Armoured vehicles are patrolling the streets and troops have been attacking demonstrators with catapults and even rubber bullets. That was a military crackdown in Kachin state overnight, and there have been similar scenes in the second biggest city, Mandalay, over the past few hours. But despite the threat, people are determined to take a stand. So says human rights activist Ang Ko Mo in Yangon.
People, of course, when they see these heavy military allocations, troop allocated in the different streets in Yangon, the fear is there. But also, I think there is the courage already is there together with the fear. And I really hope the courage of the public will fight the fear that they have.
The protesters have continued their calls for the release of Myanmar's civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi. She was supposed to appear in court today, but a judge ordered her detention to be extended until Wednesday. So what is going on? I asked our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head.
I guess they just haven't got all their plans sorted out for whatever they're going to do to her. Remember, they've detained her after a coup, which most of the world regards as illegal. She was elected in a landslide last year. There's actually quite a lot of pretty strong critical argument against what the military did from a legal point of view, and they've charged her with possessing illegal walkie-talkies, which is laughable as she was the de facto head of state and, of course, had lots of security in her home who would have been using them. I doubt she ever used them herself. And I think they need to build a stronger case. And it isn't clear why they need an extra 2 days before she appears in court. She may not appear in person. They may do it remotely anyway. She's under effective house arrest in her home in the capital, Naypyidaw. In effect, the generals have torn up the rule book. They're making new laws anyway, really tough, or amending the legal code as they go along. They can do what they want. So nobody expects them to follow the rules in dealing with Aung San Suu Kyi. We certainly don't expect them to allow her to appear in public. That would be disastrous for them now when they're still facing so much public opposition. I mean, she'd simply rally that opposition even more strongly than it's been mobilised up to now.
You mentioned the opposition. In the past sort of few hours and days, we've seen a tougher military response with some shots fired, tanks on the streets, a toughening up of the penal code. Do you think the generals have been surprised by the scale of the opposition?
I don't think they were prepared for this sort of organic civil disobedience movement that has formed without leaders. You know, they cut the National League for Democracy, Aung San Suu Kyi's party, out right at the start of the coup by arresting all the key leaders there, their local administrators as well. People have organised themselves, often by profession, often using social media, to an extraordinarily large extent. I mean, it's, for the first time in Myanmar, people can spread information very, very quickly. So in small towns and villages, they're seeing what people are doing in Yangon almost instantaneously and organising themselves. And so we're seeing the military now pulling together a strategy. It's not quite clear what it is. They cut the internet for 8 hours last night. That terrified people. The soldiers had already come out on the streets. There were armoured vehicles. There were quite serious clashes in one town, in Mitchin. At least there was an awful lot of gunfire there. People were very frightened, and everyone thought, oh my God, this is going to be another bloodbath. Actually, not a lot seems to have happened last night, but the military presence is very visible, and everyone in Myanmar knows that when soldiers are there, that if you clash with them, they will use lethal force. They always have in the past. So it looks right now as though the military is kind of ratcheting up pressure and intimidation in the hope of wearing this movement that they hadn't really expected to form, wearing it down.
Jonathan Head, our Southeast Asia correspondent. Yesterday at this time on the programme, we reported that an Indian climate activist called Disha Ravi had been arrested for allegedly posting information about the ongoing farmers' protests on social media. Today, arrest warrants have been issued against 2 other climate activists as part of a police investigation into an alleged international conspiracy to spread hostility towards India. Let's talk to our correspondent, Anbarasan Etirajan. Who are the activists and what are the charges they're facing?
They are all linked to the same case in which Disha Ravi was arrested on Sunday. That is, attempting to bring what they describe as disaffection towards the lawfully elected government of India. So one is Nikita Jacob, another one is from the state of Maharashtra. Now, the police are saying that all these 3 people, they were in touch with each other and they edited this document which basically gives information about the farmers' protest and how people can support it online. They shared it with a global climate change activist, Greta Thunberg. So this actually created a situation where that also led to the violence on the 26th of January during the farmers' protest. But there has been an outcry on the social media saying this is a clear attempt by the government to curb political dissent and freedom of expression. Some even are questioning, India is the largest democracy. How come a few documents edited by these women and these people could even shake the foundations of India?
Yeah, why are climate activists getting involved in the farmers' protests and why are the authorities so worried about it?
So we have to go back, to 1 year before when lots of these climate change activists were against the government's proposal to change environmental regulations, which was favoring industries. And many of these activists thought the new regulations will really harm India's environment. So they bombarded the Ministry of Environment and the minister with campaign with their objections to these laws. And people are now linking, because at that time itself, some of these activists got a warning saying that you are acting against India's interests for raising objections to the law. So now the whole question is all about where this particular debate is happening. All these activists, they don't find any platform on the mainstream Indian media because most of them are pro-government. So social media has become a turf war between these young climate activists and the government. And that's why these young activists are very keen to express their opposition to some of the government's policies.
Anbarasan Etirajan, thank you. The billionaire Bill Gates says solving climate change would be the most amazing thing humanity has ever done. And by comparison, ending the coronavirus pandemic is very, very easy. In a new book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, the Microsoft founder says we should focus on using technology to cut greenhouse gas emissions to zero. He said it will require an innovation effort on a scale never before seen. Our chief environment correspondent, Justin Relat, asked Bill Gates first for his assessment of just how big a problem is the pandemic.
It's not as big as the Second World War, but it's the biggest event since then. It's the entire globe. The economic impacts are in the trillions, the loss of learning, the suffering. It's terrible that the poorer countries, don't have the same ability to borrow and spend as the rich countries. In fact, Africa's again facing a gigantic debt crisis, and the interruption in their basic health services will actually kill more people than coronavirus will directly. But the pandemic will come to an end because these amazing vaccines were invented in a year, and compared to climate change, that's very, very easy. Sadly, climate change will cause far more deaths, but it requires innovation across the entire physical economy, changing steel plants, cement plants, electricity, transport. So if we achieve getting to zero, it'll be the most amazing thing humanity has ever done.
How do you get people to come up with these kind of breakthroughs, these innovations?
Yeah, it's a very good point. So You have to drive the innovation pipeline. So that starts with the government's basic R&D budget. Then you need a form of venture capital that can take those ideas out of the lab and back them even when they're very high risk. And you need partnerships with big companies, and then you need somebody who's willing to buy the products to create volume, to bring those prices down, to try to recreate what happened with solar panels.
What you're talking about is effectively government subsidy, aren't you?
Yes, because of the damage climate will bring, we need to have price signals to tell the private sector that we want green products.
Look, isn't it a little bit rich? Bill Gates urging more government intervention, because when you were building Microsoft, you battled governments around the world, arguing regulation stifled your ability to innovate.
Of government in terms of roads and justice and education and scientific research. You know, I'm the biggest fan of government doing those things in an efficient way. And here with climate, without government policies, there's no way we won't work ourselves in.
Above the age of 60 and very high rates of coverage for younger people, you can open the education system. Israel is one of the leading countries in closing the education system. And now when most of the public is protected, it seems very weird that we still don't open enough. So there is a huge debate in Israel about that at the moment.
I heard more about the study from our Jerusalem correspondent, Yolande Nell.
Well, this is the biggest study in Israel to date, and the studies in Israel are proving very useful because of the rapid vaccine rollout that has been here, because of the very good databases that are kept here. These figures actually come from the largest of the country's 4 healthcare providers, called Clalit, which covers more than half of to a senior official at Clalit. He said it shows unequivocally that Pfizer's vaccine is extremely effective in the real world as opposed to just in the clinical study.
And what is the strategy on easing the lockdown? Because despite the high number of people who've been vaccinated, people might be surprised that there are still quite a few restrictions in Israel.
That's right, and actually at the moment I'm looking out across one of the main shopping malls in Jerusalem. There's not a single car in the car park, because although these are an area of concern, in general there has been sort of less of a take-up in some parts of the ultra-Orthodox community, despite there being high infection rates in those communities, and also among Israeli Arabs, who make up about 20% of the Israeli population. Then you have, from the Palestinian side, you have the fact that 100,000 that work just in construction and agriculture, Palestinians from the West Bank that work inside Israel and Jerusalem, there are employers who are really pushing for them, because they are people that mix regularly with Israelis, to have vaccination programs from Israel, because at the moment we know in the West Bank and Gaza there have just been a small number of a few thousand vaccines donated by the Israelis to cover medics in the West Bank. Also Palestinians who work in Israeli hospitals and in East Jerusalem have been offered the vaccine against coronavirus.
Yolande Nell in Jerusalem. Following yesterday's election in the semi-autonomous region of Catalonia, there have been more calls for independence from Spain. Pro-separatist politicians increased their number of seats and won more than half the popular vote. The acting regional chief of the biggest separatist party, Esquerra Republicana de Catalunya, Per Aragonés, urged the Spanish Prime Minister to open dialogue.
Sit and talk. I would like to send a message to European authorities. The results are clear. We, the pro-independence parties, have a majority. We have reached more than 50% of the popular vote. The Catalan people have spoken. The time has come to negotiate a referendum of self-determination.
However, the pro-independence parties are divided among themselves, and the socialists who run the country and who are opposed to independence actually narrowly came out as the largest single party in the election. The Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs is Arantxa González.
This is what the Spanish government wants: dialogue, reunion, discussion, and above all, leaving behind the politics of unilateralism that mar Catalonia and Spain in the last 4 years. This is the only party that has won votes. All other parties, including independentists, have lost votes compared to the last time. So we've got to be a little bit careful with the figures, and we've got to be careful to draw very stark conclusions from the votes that took place yesterday.
The Spanish Foreign Minister. Well, our correspondent Guy Hedgeko, who is in Madrid, gave us his assessment of the results.
The result of it was that the Socialist Party won the election for the first time in its history. It won a Catalan election, which is significant for the Socialist Party, which is also leading the government in the rest of Spain. So this was a major victory for the Socialists, and their candidate was Salvador Illa, who just a few weeks ago stepped down as Spain's health minister. So he'd been handling the pandemic and the management of the pandemic for the last year. But although the Socialists are a unionist party, pro-independence parties performed quite well, and overall they managed to increase their majority in the Catalan parliament. So in a sense it was also a victory for them. The turnout was very low, as expected. It was somewhere around 55%, so it was extremely low, the turnout, and that was attributed to the pandemic, although there was bad weather and so on as well. But the feeling was that concerns about safety were the reason for the low turnout. Although having said that, there was a very high postal vote as people stayed at home, many of them voting from home. So that was sort of something which had been a worry for a lot of the parties throughout the day yesterday. And, obviously a low turnout is not great for the winner in the end, but I think the Socialists will nonetheless be very pleased with the result anyway.
Guy Hedgecoe in Madrid. Right, let's get a look at what else has been happening in the world today with Jerry.
A team of French health workers is starting work in Portugal, where hospitals have been under severe strain because of high levels of COVID-19 cases. As a percentage of its population, Portugal currently has the highest number of infections in the EU. South Africa has reopened its land borders following a month-long closure to slow the spread of coronavirus. Freight traffic is resuming with Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mozambique, Eswatini, Botswana and Lesotho. The Nikkei share index in Japan has closed above the 30,000 mark for the first time in more than 3 decades. It's being seen as an indication of the anticipated global rebound from the economic slump caused by the pandemic.
Scientists have discovered marine organisms living on a boulder on the sea floor, 900 metres beneath the Antarctic ice shelf. Researchers from the British Antarctic Survey stumbled on the life-bearing rock after sinking a borehole through the ice to obtain sediment from the seabed. The accidental discovery has led scientists to rethink the limits of life on Earth. Hugh Griffiths is a marine biologist at the British Antarctic Survey.
What we found were actually filter-feeding animals that were attached to the rocks, so